Good evening, guys. My name's Nick, and I'm a recovered addict. It's an absolute kind of pleasure and a mystery to be sitting here in front of you today, clean, alive. I'm going to try and avoid swearing because I think my mum wants to listen to this, and mum doesn't like swearing. But I think if I let one slip, she wouldn't be too fussed because she's going to sleep tonight. So as I said, I honestly have no idea how I'm able now to sit in front of you and share this, share my experience. Something's happened to me. Whereas I'm going to talk about relapse, I'm going to talk about my last relapse, and I'm going to talk about it as something that happens to me, not something that I do. And whereas relapse is something that happens to me and not something I do, the solution that I've experienced is something that happens to me, not something that I've done. I'm not long off a detox. I finished an Esprador detox a couple of weeks ago. But by working with my sponsor, by reading from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and sharing information and experience with my sponsor, I've been able to have a spiritual experience. And by that, I mean my complete outlook and attitude towards life has just shifted kind of 90 degrees. Everything still looks the same, but the way I feel about it's very, very different. So yeah, we use the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I will refer back to it. And that's not because I've got nothing to say. It's not because I'm brainwashed. It's because if we all refer to the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, we are all literally singing from the same hymn sheet. There's no we are unified in both our description of the problem and our description of the solution to that problem. And that's all I really have is a description of what happens to me when I relapse. I still don't know why I relapse. As the big book actually says on page, page 35, what sort of thinking dominates the alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of the first drink? And it says before that, so we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking, because that is the crux of the problem. So I will talk about my previous relapse. And having spent the last 10 years of my life, basically, sadly, in one institution or another, one form of group therapy or another, I've been trained to kind of examine my past and think what was going on for me and what was I thinking when it happened. So what was going on for me and what was I thinking on my last relapse? Everything was going pretty well. I finally got into university. I had a lovely girlfriend. My family were back in my life. There was literally not a cloud on my horizon. So why did I relapse? I thought I'd control it. I thought, I've got about 18 months now. I will just use for 2 days in a row, not 3, I won't get addicted. I will just have one drink. They won't smell it on me. And before I do it, thus had begun a spiraling spree into chaos again. And all those things that I had back in my life, I lost very, very quickly. I still can't explain why I did it. All I have is a description of what I was thinking when it happened. Okay, so yeah, I use the term spiritual experience. Spiritual experience is something very difficult for me to come to terms with as something I needed to have. Something who was came as a staunch atheist. I literally fought my sponsor against the term God because I would not have it. And my experience of having a spiritual experience and having recovered now is not as someone who has come to find God, but as someone who has simply quit playing God. And I've been able to do this through doing an inventory in step 4 and doing nightly inventory and working with my sponsor, sharing experiences. Just every resentment I have, every fear I have, every harm I cause can be traced back to me ultimately trying to play God in one form or another. And it's only in ceasing kind of now playing God that I've been able to have an experience whereby I'm able to sit in front of you now and share kind of what's happened to me. And the big book is also a conduit, I think, for sharing experience. I could sit in front of you and give a life story now. But some of you might be able to identify with that or not. And basically, really what's happened to me in my life and the carnage I've caused kind of irrelevant. And when I say irrelevant, I don't mean to diminish the consequences of my actions or the harm I cause to myself or others. I mean actually they're unuseful in contemplating the relapse problem. Okay, so, but however, if I am able to go through the jaywalker story and relate to that, and then you are able to go through it and relate to that as well, that will give us some ground to work on and we can start. So I'm going to quickly go through it again, but I'm going to change some of the, where is it? What page is it? Page 37. I'm just going to kind of go over it again, but I'm going to swap a few words around and see if anyone can identify with it. So our behaviour is absurd and incomprehensible to the first drink as that with an individual with a passion, say, for taking drugs, injecting heroin and crack. He gets a thrill out of injecting heroin and crack on a daily basis. He enjoys himself for a few years despite friendly warnings. Yeah, do you know, when I first started using and drinking, I used and drink because I enjoyed the effects produced. And I wasn't born an alcoholic, although the first time I got drunk. It's certainly something that's progressed in my life, and I don't believe I was born an alcoholic. And I can think one of the warnings I had was from a chemistry teacher called Mr. Deacon when I was 15 years old in class. I think I'd had a couple of drinks or something. I was acting up, and he pointed at me, he singled me out, and he said, "You're going to end up in the gutter." Talk about an ominous warning I failed to heed. And he was absolutely right. I think I probably swore at him or something, but he was absolutely right. So despite friendly warnings, sometimes unfriendly warnings, as that probably was, I still continue to drink. Up to this point, you'd labelled me foolish and having queer ideas of fun. Okay, luck then deserted me, and I ended up in hospital a couple of times. I was a regular attender at my local hospital, which is Princess Royal Hospital in Telford. I remember after my last admission there, which was a few years ago, I've since migrated to other hospitals in this area. My last admission there, somebody had come into my house, I think as a way of trying to get me to stop coming to hospital. I put a piece of paper under my door with every single hospital admission I'd had in the last 2 years. And there was about 70 or 80 hospital admissions for detoxes, injuries, overdoses. So yeah, I started appearing at hospitals. If I was normal, you'd have thought I'd cut it out by now. You know, having in and out of hospital, lost my family, you thought, you know, any normal person, to the casual observer, you just say, just stop doing it. I would have had to have been one of three things. I'd have had to either been stupid, a bad person, or fucking insane. Or just, sorry, Mum. Or insane. I'm not stupid. Don't think I'm a bad person, but as we'll go into, I have been insane. Presently, he takes another overdose, and this time has fatty liver disease, which is something I've got. He leaves the hospital. Now, within a week of leaving hospital, within a day, usually, or an hour, or even while I was in hospital, I've been in hospital bleeding heavily from a stomach bleed, and I've been still, when they've, for the brief 5 minutes they've taken me off the drip, I've kind of covered up my cannula, put a coat on, and I've gone down the off license to get a can, or I've gone to a pharmacy to get some over-the-counter medication, the same stuff that put me in hospital in the first place. Insanity. Yeah. He tells you he has decided to stop taking drugs for good, but in a few weeks he breaks both legs. Countless promises to myself and to my mum and dad. And it wasn't me waking up in the morning with a thick head going, "Oh God, I'm not doing that again." I meant it. I wanted to stop, but I found that I was simply unable to. Over through the years, his conduct continues, accompanied by continual promises to be careful or to keep off the streets altogether. "Mum, Dad, I won't do it again." "Okay, Nick, fair enough." And sometimes I wouldn't do it again for a week or a month or even 18 months at one point. I was able to, God knows how, I was able to not put a drink or drug in me once for 18 months. And of course, the terrible thing behind that is Mum and Dad get their hopes up again. He appears to be doing okay. I've been here before. I don't mean sitting in this chair before. My life has been in this situation before, where I've not used a drink or a drug for a little while. So to be honest, 10 or 20 years makes of drinking will make a skeptic out of anyone. My mum and dad ain't got their hopes up. They're talking to me again, but they ain't got their hopes up. Have you, Mum? She's shaking her head. She hasn't. I wouldn't. I wouldn't, trust me. Okay, finally he can no longer work. Well, I say finally, I never worked. Never got to the point of really having a job anyway. His wife gets a divorce. His mum stops talking to him. That's actually probably the most loving and kind thing my mother ever did for me, was stop talking to me at one point. But still, it wasn't enough. Having lost the kind of the final, kind of, I don't know, almost like a security blanket of having mum at the end of the phone for me, usually with 20 quid. Having had that finally disappear still wasn't enough, although I thought it was enough. He shuts himself up in an asylum, a rehab, or a dry house. Spent the last 10 years in rehabs or dry houses, man. I'm not doing well, by the way. You ask me if I'm doing well. I'll tell you I am. I'm not. I'm closer to 50 than I am to 20. And I live in a fucking dry house. Not doing that well. Tries every known means to get jaywalking out of his head. So now we're talking about strategies and methods, aren't we? Tried everything, man. Gratitude lists didn't keep me clean. Lists of consequences didn't keep me clean. I can do as many meetings in as many days as I like. It's not going to keep me clean. If I think that there's something I can do to prevent relapse, I'm in trouble. If relapse is something that happens to me and not something I do, therefore logically, there is nothing I can do to prevent a relapse. And it was only in the understanding of that, and by discussing this chapter actually more about alcoholism with my sponsor, that it was absolutely pivotal in my eventual understanding of a process I would need to go through to finally recover. A spiritual experience is what I'm talking about, but I'll come to that. He shuts himself up in a rehab, blah, blah, blah. But the day he comes out, of rehab, he fucking shoots up again. Which kills him. It was going to kill me. Such a man would be crazy, isn't he? Insanity is a strong word, I suppose, but how can I deem my actions to be anything other than that? If it's not a result of how I was feeling or what I was doing, it has to be a result of what I was thinking. My thinking around it every single time has been that I will in some way control it. There will be something I can do. I will avoid relationships, would be a good one. Yeah. I've relapsed in relationships and I've relapsed out of relationships. I've relapsed in dry houses. I've relapsed out of dry houses. I've relapsed when I've been breathing in, and I've relapsed when I've been breathing out. So therefore, if the solution to relapse is simply stop getting in relationships, I can just as easily apply that to stop breathing. Because I'm, at any given point in time, I am feeling something or doing something. So I could write a list of if I could go back and actually catalogue every relapse I'd ever had, it'd be impossible because I can't remember. But I was able to, and then put a column next to that. What was he feeling? What was he doing? And then just avoid those things. I wouldn't be able to leave my bedroom. So therefore, it's unuseful, I think, to address feelings and what I was doing. So therefore, I have to address what I was thinking. And it says in the book, no human aid is going to be enough. I needed to develop my own idea of a higher power. And as I said before, I really kind of hit a brick wall with that for a while. I have an idea of what my higher power is. I'm not going to go into it now. If you are interested to know what it is, hit me up afterwards and we can have a discussion about that. Talk all day about that kind of stuff. But it was only in understanding that no human aid, myself including, you lot ain't going to help me. Group of drunks ain't going to help me. Because if addiction is having no power over relapse, you can have 100 addicts in a room and 100 times 0 is still 0. So that's not going to be enough. Good orderly direction is not going to be enough. I don't even really know what that means. I think I have good orderly direction as a consequence of my relationship with my higher power. But that's not my higher power. I thought you put your hand up, or you want to say something. I thought he's not going to criticise it after I've shared. He's actually just going to bust in halfway through the share and criticise me. Okay, wow, okay. Okay, so why do some people get this and some people don't get it? I don't know. but it alludes to it on page 58. Okay, so it says on page 58, rarely have we seen a person fail who's thoroughly followed our path. A spiritual experience is kind of interwoven into the steps, in that I wasn't able to do the steps without having a spiritual experience. And without having a spiritual experience, I am unable to practice the principles of the steps. It's woven into the fabric of the steps themselves. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. I've given myself to this program, man, to this spiritual way of life. I never thought those words would come out of my mouth, but they have done. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. I had to be honest with myself. I had to give myself an accurate appraisal of where I was in life. Just tap me on the shoulder and ask me how I'm doing fine. But the truth of the matter is I wasn't doing fine. And it's almost kind of a reverse psychological and social dysmorphia, in that if I looked at my life, I'd see it being all right. But on the outside looking in, it's doing pretty shit. And it was only kind of in understanding that I wasn't doing very well that I was able to kind of reach out and accept a spiritual solution to this problem. How long have we been going for? 2 minutes. Wow, I can't believe I've talked for so long. That's good. Yeah, so do you know what? I'm just going to leave it with this. Being on an opiate replacement therapy as well does not prevent you from doing this shit. I'm testament to that. I only came off a couple of weeks ago. I was still able to work with the sponsor, go through inventory, start working daily inventory, and have a spiritual experience. So my advice to any newcomers or anybody who's maybe kind of sitting there and just expects it to like seep in through osmosis, it's not going to. You have to put some action into this stuff. You can't just expect to do meetings, go home and just be your normal self and do your normal shit and expect to recover from this illness. You have to do some fucking work with a sponsor to get well. I'll leave it there.